back to the third episode of the Kong Dynasty. In this episode, I'm going to be going through kind of the step-by-step process of trying to put together the frame, basically, and assembly for a timber grow light kit. Actually, two kits. I think just about everybody loves mail day, so going through this box of goodies was quite the treat. Nicely packed. Everything was really well wrapped up. Pretty nicely labeled too. Pretty easy to see where you're going to go with things, what the process was going to be. Other than watching some videos, mostly Growmouse videos about how he went about building some frames, my first step was to go through and try to figure out these brackets that were going to lead to how everything else was spaced out. One of the mistakes I made was following the Growmouse videos a little too closely. So I went through and made all these cuts and found out pretty quickly that the heat sinks that come with the timber kits are not quite as wide as some of the heat sinks that must be available through Cutter and some of the other websites. So I wasted a little material and a little time on that, but my solution was to go through and trim them down a little bit. So I was a little nervous about that. It always seems like whenever I'm trying to tackle some small cuts, it seems like something's going to bind up and bounce back at me. And in case any of you were wondering how smart I was going to be about this, I of course figured out that I could stack up maybe 3 or 4 pieces and really save myself some time. And that's when I pushed the limits a little too much, and one of them got bound up, and sure enough, shot back and cut me up a little bit. But what's a project without a little bit of blood? So I got things all patched up, all repaired, and kept tackling the process. As far as the size of the actual frame, I looked at some of the frames that Timber sells on their website and saw that they do a 42-inch by 42-inch frame, and figured that I better do the same thing. That turned out to probably be a little bit of overkill. We'll go over some of that a little later, but I guess in the end it was nice to have a little bit of wiggle room, but I certainly didn't need the frame to be as big as I ended up making it. Here's a few of the tools that I found really helpful during the process of marking and drilling the holes for the different cross sections and whatnot. A digital caliper just kind of kept the guesswork to a minimum, just finding your center point, knowing exactly where that needed to be. What I should have been using to mark my center holes and everything else was the center punch, which I ended up upgrading and buying later on into the project. I started with just a nail set, and that worked out fine too. And I also had a little scribe just so I could mark lines and not have to worry about a pencil rubbing off or anything like that. And then finally a rivet tool. I know there's cheaper ones. I just thought, I'm going to buy this once, I might as well buy a brand that I trust. The thing I really liked about this is that the head sort of pivots and you can get at it from different angles, and then you can also use different size rivets in this. With all the different projects that I've tackled over the years, I've found that having a designated workspace, or at least an area set aside, ends up being a really helpful thing. So I had this black mat that I laid out, and I just tried to have all the tools and materials that I needed just right at my fingertips, so I wasn't having to waste time running around the house looking for different things. The unfortunate part was that I figured out along the way that I didn't exactly have everything measured up right, and a few of the things that I had laid out were actually going to be a problem. So I finally thought I was all set here. I figured out where these drivers were going to go. I was going to center them, and I had the zip ties ready and holes drilled, and everything was looking slick. And the next morning I was all ready to put cobs on, and while I was watching a show that Growmouse had going on YouTube, I figured out that I was totally off. I had been working within this 42-inch parameter, and I had gone through and measured each cob and then subtracted the width of those cobs and divided by 3 to find my spacing. And at a certain point he laid out this diagram that let me know I was pretty far off. So here are the issues I was running into. I thought everything was spaced out really nicely. I thought it was all ready to go for that, and I realized pretty quickly, based on the spacing that I was seeing, grow mouse layout, I was gonna have a cob right next to the driver, and so I was a little concerned about the amount of heat that might be coming off of that, and then what sort of impact that would have on the driver or vice versa. And Loki Grow and Grow Mouse and a few other guys on Instagram gave some really solid information, and I realized that I needed to just figure out a whole different placement for the driver. And I also realized that the frame I had made, which ended up being 42 by 42, I realized that everything needed to move in on that. So that was sort of the next step, was adding extra bars, and that also sort of ended up providing a place for or a new home for the drivers. So I measured out the drivers and ended up just cutting 4 of these pieces that were just a little under 4 inches long. And then I ended up attaching those between my main cob support pieces. Those little side support pieces ended up making a great home for the drivers, as you can see here. I just centered them and then drilled holes and riveted through the other side, made kind of a little T out of the 2 pieces, and then just followed the screw holes that were already in the lip of the driver, and then mounted them just right through the middle. One of the things that I ended up making that really helped through this process was a little jig that I used to space the bars out for the cobs. And then I also went through and found the center point once, just based on where the screws were on the heat sink. And then I lined that up, drill a hole, and then use that each time kind of as my guide. So I just went ahead and drew a line with my scribe, and then centered the hole on that line, and then got a little start on it, like a little pilot hole, just so my drill bit wouldn't slip on the aluminum, and then follow through with the drilling. And then one of the keys that I found was starting on the inside of the L, so the actual part where the heatsink would sit, and then when you're done, just making sure that you're getting rid of all the burrs. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just to flip the whole fixture or the whole frame over, and then just run the drill again. Pretty quickly just wear off any burrs that are there. You're left with a little bit of a circle, but it didn't bother me any, and it was easier than getting a file out and trying to sand all that stuff down.
You don't know